What color do you reach for? Do you reach for gray to blend in? Do you reach for black because you bitter? Do you reach for beige because you're tired of standing out? Some of y'all have been coloring with borrowed crayons for too long. Coloring with shame, with guilt, with generational expectations. Coloring with fear that didn't even start with you. And now you're wondering why your life doesn't look like your life. Because you let their palette paint your picture. But what if coloring outside the lines could actually bring about healing? What if the vision had a hue? What if healing had a color? What if joy wasn't loud but deep like indigo? What if faith was white like a fresh new canvas, waiting for you to color on it? Here's the real. The color you pick tells on your soul. And maybe the canvas doesn't look like the promise because you stopped asking God for new colors after your last disappointment.
Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Transform You, where I believe if you can change your thinking, you can change your life. Whether you are watching me on YouTube, listening on Spotify or Apple Music, I'm humbled and honored that you're taking out the time to listen. I'm excited because today's conversation is about being creative, being innovative, being bold, taking risks. Because I really believe if you're going to maximize your life, you really got to get out of the comfort zone, the boxes that people have tried to put you in, try to define you by, labeled you as, all of the things. And so the reason I got here to this thought was because a couple of days ago, I was with my daughter, Sage, and she was coloring. She was in a coloring book, and she was free, she was wild, she was coloring outside the lines, and she was having a ball. I mean, an absolute ball. She was having the greatest time of her life. And, you know, when she colors, she sings, and so she's coloring, she's singing, and she's just going off for real. And I said to her, Sage, hey, baby, let me show you how to color inside the lines. And before I could even correct her, it's like the correction hit me. It was like God was whispering to me, why are you trying to shut down her freedom just to satisfy your fear? And that's when I realized I wasn't correcting her creativity. I was managing my discomfort. And I thought I was just talking about a coloring book. But what I was actually doing was repeating the same script that gets handed to a lot of dreamers. Stay neat, stay inside the lines, stay predictable, follow the status quo, because neatness often gets approval. But some of the greatest things that have ever been built were messy first. And as people, we often correct what makes us uncomfortable, because sometimes the thing that you're actually trying to correct is a reflection of what's unsettled in you. So we discipline boldness because we never have the courage to be bold. We silence our curiosity because we were taught that questioning meant disrespect. We micromanage creativity because we're terrified of chaos, not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. And so we start shrinking people down to our comfort zone. And that's the danger, y'all, because we've been taught that discomfort means disobedience, that different means defiant. And in doing so, we become the gatekeepers of the very freedom we say we believe in. But what if coloring outside the lines isn't rebellion, but it's recovery of our faith, our imagination, and our identity? Because that's what it's really going to take for you to color outside the lines. Because faith creates without permission, moves without applause, and paints without guarantee of outcomes. That takes creative courage. Because if you're going to be a creative, if you're going to think on a different level, if you're going to go from where you are to where you desire to be in your life, from here to there, this is what you got to understand. Coloring outside the lines takes authenticity. You got to be authentically you. It's disruptive. It's risky. You can't color outside the lines and play safe. You can't even break the rules and look polished. And you can't walk by faith and still demand proof of sight first. Muhammad Ali once said, I'm the greatest. And I said that before I knew I was. He didn't follow the box they gave him. He talked different. He walked different. He trained different. He made the world adjust to his lines. Ali wasn't just fighting opponents. He was fighting frames. What a black man was allowed to be in America. How humility was supposed to sound, what greatness was supposed to look like. Ali had the courage to color outside the lines. And because of it, the whole world shifted to it. Lean in. Coloring outside the lines takes authenticity. And authenticity has become a buzzword, a catchphrase. But authenticity takes soul work, takes the deep work, the dirty work. It says I'm going to show up unapologetically me because I know who I am. And when you know who you are, you'd rather be a bad you than a carbon copy of a polished version of someone else. Listen to me. Hear what I'm about to say to you. To color outside the lines, it takes authenticity. And authenticity is not rebellion for rebellion's sake, resistance for resistance sake.
It's the return to who you really are beneath the performance, beneath the people pleasing, the pressure to bend and blend in. Authenticity is not soft, it's not passive. It's one of the most disruptive forces you can carry. And I'm talking to some disruptors today. I'm talking to some disruptors that say, I'm not going to settle for the status quo when God is calling me to write and color outside the lines. Because in a world built on algorithms, branding, and crafted perfection, being real is rare. It's a threat. It's revolutionary. When you choose authenticity over plagiarism, you are taking a stand over every status quo they told you were supposed to be. You are waging war against a culture that would rather you settle than take the next steps to become your best self. And you have to be a disruptive thinker, a disruptive mover, because it doesn't ask for permission. It's risky because it might cost you acceptance. It's honorable because it reclaims your original design. And that's what coloring outside the lines really is. It's not sloppy. It's not careless. It's honest creativity, truth with a body. It's you creating from alignment instead of approval. And this is why a lot of people choose to stay in the lines. They would rather release their human agency than resist conformity. And this is why it's difficult, because the biggest resistance to coloring outside the line isn't skill, it's safety. Most people aren't lacking talent. They're trapped behind the need to be tolerated. People only stay inside the lines for one reason. It's safer. It's familiar. They're praised. They're given the illusion of control, acceptance, and predictability. And that's a trap, because what feels safe in one season feels suffocating in the next. And some of us were handed outlines, frames, rules, scripts by systems, families, even faith communities, and we mistake them for our identity. We were raised in houses where silence meant honor, where obedience meant invisibility, where don't rock the boat meant don't discover who you really are. And now, as an adult, we confuse compliance with character. And worst of all, we confuse smallness with security. You don't got to shrink down to what they said about you, what they think about you, or the boxes they try to put you in. Don't shrink down to the level of their thinking. And too many of us are playing in the backdrop of the dream that God gave you. Why are you playing the supporting actor in the dream that God gave you? Are you waiting for the star to show up? I promise you, when you do that, what you're saying is you're waiting for somebody else to be the star in your own movie. When God gave you the dream, he gave it to you, not to them. Stop shrinking to the level of their thinking. God didn't call you to color in the lines. He gave you a mind to think outside the box. God never called you to shrink to survive. And if the box is too small for your anointing, it's not rebellion. It's wisdom. Staying in the lines might keep you accepted, but it will also keep you anonymous. You weren't made for invisible greatness. And listen to me, you don't outgrow the box by waiting. You outgrow the box by disagreeing with it. By saying, this version of me is no longer the fullest expression of what God has placed inside of me. And I hear you asking me, what do you do when the lines are familiar but too small? You choose vision over validation. You choose movement over maintenance. You choose discomfort over dishonesty, because the lines may be safe, but you can't want change and still remain the same. You got to understand, before you pick up a crayon again and try again, you got to give yourself permission. Not from the audience, not from your parents, not from your followers, mentors, tradition, or trauma, but you got to give yourself permission, because for so long you've been waiting for approval, but what you really needed was internal permission. Hear me. This is not arrogance. This is confidence. Matter of fact, this is not even confidence. This is Godfidence. It's the kind of confidence that comes from knowing God would rather me be an authentic me than a plagiarized version of someone else. So I need you to do me a favor. I need you to say this with me. Repeat after me. I give myself permission to grow, to shift, to dream again, to believe again, to make a mess, to understand that progress is better than perfection, because permission is the lock, but authenticity is the key. And some of you have been holding both in your hand and you haven't used them at all. You got analysis paralysis, but it's time for you to pick up the crayon again and start coloring outside the lines. It's time for you to tap into that little boy, that little girl, that dreams, that believes for the impossible. Move like you've already seen the end of the chapter. Talk like God co-signed your name before you got the title. Stop waiting for people to give you a seat at the table. Build your own table. Stop waiting for the room to start clapping before you enter. You are the confirmation. You are the evidence. You are proof of life that God is working through you and that God wants to use you. This is not arrogance, y'all. This is confidence. This is Godfidence. This is the kind that says, I'm convinced by my conviction that what God has put in me, I refuse to plagiarize what's already dying in someone else. God would rather I be wild, imperfect, authentic than a polished replica of someone else's fear. So this is my question. What color do you use when hope runs low, when applause stops, when the mirror won't lie and the voices won't hush? What color do you reach for? Do you reach for gray to blend in? Do you reach for black because you bitter? Do you reach for beige because you're tired of standing out? Some of y'all have been coloring with borrowed crayons for too long, coloring with shame, with guilt, with generational expectations, coloring with fear that didn't even start with you. And now you're wondering why your life doesn't look like your life, because you let their palette paint your picture. But what if coloring outside the lines could actually bring about healing? What if the vision had a hue? What if healing had a color? What if joy wasn't loud but deep like indigo? What if faith was white like a fresh new canvas, waiting for you to color on it? Here's the real. The color you pick tells on your soul. And maybe the canvas doesn't look like the promise because you stopped asking God for new colors after your last disappointment. I gotta move on. Faith requires blindness, but vision requires bravery. Numbers 13, Moses sent 12 spies to scout out the promised land. All 12 saw the same land, same enemies, same city, same impossibility. But only 2, Joshua and Caleb, came back with a good report. 2 saw it through the lens of faith. Some of us got to be like the 2 who, yes, we see the giants. Yes, we see the impossibilities, but we also can reframe it and say, if the land could sustain a giant who's way bigger than me, surely the same land can sustain me. And that's what faith looks like when you start coloring outside the lines. It puts fear in the box and it releases you outside of it. And that's the difference between sight and vision. Sight sees the corner, vision sees around the corner. Sight sees the problem. Vision says, I'm the answer to the problem. And you are an answer to a problem. Because sight says, be realistic, but faith says, be obedient. And I dare you, between now and the end of this year, bet on yourself, because faith will ask you to act before you see it. In other words, you don't got to see it to say it. You got to say it until you see it. And if you demand proof before movement, you'll stay in the box of what already exists. You got to believe before the results. You got to believe before you achieve. Mike Jordan got cut from his high school basketball team. By the world standard, that should have been the frame in which he colored in. But he refused. He didn't let someone else's no become the ceiling of his ability. He did not color with results. He colored with belief, because belief comes before results. And if you're waiting for results and you don't have the mind to believe, you will never do the work. He practiced every day like he already had become what he hadn't become yet, in silence, in ridicule, in rejection, in darkness, without applause, without proof. Rejection did not define him. Obsession did. Obsession becomes your possessions. So if you don't obsess about it in your head, it'll never get in your heart. And if it doesn't get in your heart, you won't make an action. Because watch this. Obsession is what faith looks like in private. Nobody saw him putting in the work. He just showed up the next year and made the team. And this is what we got to learn. Faith oftentimes requires blindness, for we walk by faith and not by sight. That's not ignorance, that's trust. It means I have to move without information, confirmation, and validation, without the blueprint. But vision, that requires bravery. And some of us got to get brave, because once you see what God has shown you, you'll never be able to unsee it. And here's the tension. You can live either by sight and stay in the box of conformity and what feels safe, or you can live by faith and go blind long enough to become who you were born to be. Here are 3 things that I believe is going to help you. How to paint outside the lines, how to get outside the box. Number 1, you got to reclaim your permission. You don't need approval to be authentic. Most people wait for someone else to say it's okay to be bold, be different, and be disruptive. But when you are outside the lines, coloring outside the lines, doing something that nobody's done, you can't wait for the blueprint, because the blueprint doesn't exist. Coloring outside the line starts with giving yourself permission to break free from disappointed expectations and move forward anyway. This is what I want you to do. This is your practical tool. Every day, write a permission slip to yourself and say, I give myself permission to blank, even if others don't understand it. You fill that in, not me, not your family, not your spouse, not your boo, not your bae. You got to do that. Don't be upset with the results you didn't get from the work you didn't put in. Number 2 is this: build in safe, messy spaces. Creativity dies where criticism dominates. You need safe spaces and relationships that allow trial, error, ugly drafts, half-formed thoughts without fear. Because if you only create in public, you'll edit yourself to death. This is your practical tool. Every day, designate one part of your week or physical space where there are no lines, no edits, no rules. Just let it flow, let it go. Number 3 is this: practice micro bravery. Boldness isn't a leap, it's a rhythm. You don't have to blow everything up at once. Start with the small acts of defiance against your own comfort zone. Say the thing you're usually silent about. Wear what makes you feel powerful. Pitch the idea to yourself that you've been sitting on. And this is what you can do to practice this. Every day, do one thing that makes you 10% braver than yesterday. That's how boldness becomes a lifestyle. And you move from where you are to where you want to be, outside the lines of your comfort zone. Listen, I'm getting ready to wrap this up. But as I'm getting ready to wrap this up, I want to encourage somebody, pick up the crayon again. Most people don't lose their creativity. They laid it down when someone else made them feel wrong for being different. You were told that's not how it's done. You sing too hard. That's too many runs. You do too much. That's not appropriate. And little by little, you put the crayon down. In the business, you played small. In the ministry, you blended in. In your marriage, you silenced yourself. In your calling, you conformed, not to God's voice, but to the borders of fear that were handed to you. And so Romans 12:2 says, be not conformed, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Conformity says, I don't trust God enough, that he's made me more than enough. So I'd rather be a carbon copy of someone else, because at least if I'm not myself, other people will respect me. That's not true. What if I told you that mess that you made was probably the first time you've actually seen yourself for real? What if you weren't failing? What if you were finally breaking the script? What if that unfinished script, that unfinished idea that stays in the notes section of your phone was proof that you were trying something new? Don't let their lines become your limits. Don't let their approval become your permission, because it's really a secret prison. Pick up the crayon again. Pick up the book again. Pick up the dream again. Pick up the vision that God has given you again, and color with questions, color with courage, color without asking for permission, because faith doesn't wait for a map. It creates one. That's what Noah did. He built an ark that no one had seen before. What's inside of you requires you to give yourself permission, because whenever you do something new, whenever you do something innovative, creative, you will always get naysayers to tell you that's not how it's done. We don't do it like that. I know, but I'm not doing what you're doing. I'm doing what God told me to do. And when you have that kind of identity that's rooted and tethered to your relationship with God, you will never be tethered to fear. When people try to put fear on you, you're still tethered to your faith. And faith doesn't stay in the lines. It creates new ones. So check this. This is the Transform You podcast. My name is Josh Bair. And I believe if you can change your thinking, you can change your life. Y'all, I hope you have an amazing day, amazing week, an amazing month. I'll see you next time. Peace.